"You can't park here. This truck is city property now." That's the line she fired at me while a tow rig backed into my driveway like they'd rehearsed it 100 times. For a second, I thought I'd lost my mind. My neighbor's curtains shifted, but no one came outside. That's when it hit me. I was the only one standing between my keys and a bogus citation dressed up to look official. Every instinct screamed this isn't right. And then, bold as brass, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right in front of me. Tell me in the comments, would you have called her bluff or walked away? Tuesday had started like any other day. I was under the hood of my pickup replacing spark plugs before my evening shift at the shop. The wrench slipped, scraped my knuckles, and maybe that should have been the sign that nothing good was coming. This truck isn't just steel and bolts to me. My dad and I rebuilt the engine one snowy Christmas, and every part of it carries that memory, that promise we made to keep it running. That's when I caught the growl of a diesel creeping down the street. A flatbed tow truck, slow and steady, followed by a white sedan. Out stepped a woman in a navy blazer, walking like she owned the block. My gut told me this wasn't routine, but I figured maybe she was lost. She didn't pause. Didn't hesitate, just stormed into my driveway with a clipboard in one hand and a fat stack of papers in the other. She had that overconfident stride I'd seen from HOA types before, but this felt sharper, rehearsed. Every step carried the weight of someone who had pulled this trick in plenty of neighborhoods already. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice cutting like a whistle. "Are you the owner of this vehicle?" She pointed at my truck like it was junk left on the curb. Meanwhile, the tow driver lined up his rig like he knew the act by heart. Before I could answer, she hit 911 on speaker, calmly telling dispatch that my Ford was blocking emergency access and had to be seized right away. The driver moved with the certainty of someone who had done this countless times. "Yeah, that's my truck," I said evenly. "What's this about?" She flipped through her papers with the flair of someone putting on a show. "I'm Marlene Shaw, HOA Compliance Officer for Brookside Heights. This vehicle violates Fire Department. COD E813 authorized for immediate removal under public safety." She raised the document like it was a badge. And that's when my chest tightened. That feeling when you know you're being hustled. I scanned the paperwork she shoved at me. The seals looked legit, the numbers precise, but something about it felt staged, like a prop meant to intimidate. "Ma'am," I said, "that code doesn't exist. My truck's been here for years without issue. Still, the notice claimed I was blocking fire access and that the HOA had emergency powers to seize property. Convincing on the surface, but rotten underneath." Then she pulled out a bright red violation tag. "This is an official notice," she declared, peeling it free with practiced hands. "Once attached, this vehicle qualifies for immediate municipal seizure." She slapped it on my windshield as I scanned the form again. It all looked polished, but my gut told me it was fake. Since when do HOA officers get city powers or carry counterfeit citations? The whole scene felt staged. Marlene moved like an actress, pulling one paper after another in perfect order, her timing designed to overwhelm. The tow driver played his role too, already chaining up like he'd rehearsed this with her a dozen times. And I started to wonder how many other driveways had been stages for this same show. As he hooked the chains, I pulled out my phone and hit record. If this went sideways, I wanted proof. "Hold up," I said, loud for the camera. "Before you tow my truck, I'm verifying these documents with the city." Her face soured instantly. "Sir, these are official municipal orders. The driver is authorized to act under public safety, but I wasn't about to roll over." I climbed into the cab and turned the key. The motor roared alive, smooth and strong. "If it's disabled and blocking," I said, revving it, "why does it run like new?" I shut it down, grabbed a tape measure, and marked the space. From bumper to curb, fence to driveway, plenty of clearance. Wide enough for a fire rig. Her entire emergency access story was smoke. That's when a patrol cruiser rolled up behind the tow truck, and my stomach tightened. Officer Daniel Harris stepped out, taking the papers she handed over. I watched his face grow skeptical as he flipped through them. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with this code," he said carefully. "And the formatting doesn't match the city's standard citations." Finally, an officer who noticed the details. He eyed the red tag, the papers, then looked back at Marlene with suspicion. "These documents will need verification at the clerk's office before any tow can proceed," he announced. The tow driver shrugged and started unhooking his chains. "No problem, officer. I'll wait for confirmation." Marlene's face flushed crimson. Still, she pushed. "Officer, every minute this vehicle stays here increases public risk." The fire department demanded removal, but Harris wasn't buying it. He photographed everything and told the driver to stand down until City Hall confirmed the paperwork. That's when I saw her mask slip. The confident officer act cracked, revealing someone who wasn't used to being challenged. "This is highly irregular," she argued, but her voice had lost that sharp, commanding tone. Harris stayed calm. "Ma'am, anytime documents don't line up, verification is required. Standard protocol for protecting citizens from fraud." The tow rig pulled away. Harris drove off with copies, and Marlene shot me a glare so cold it could have frozen steel. "You can't park here. This truck is city property now." That's the line she threw at me while a tow rig nosed into my driveway like they'd practiced it 100 times. For a second, I thought I'd lost it. Curtains twitched across the street, but no one stepped out. And suddenly, I realized I was the only one standing between my keys and a fake ticket dressed up to look real. Every nerve in me shouted this isn't right. But she had the nerve to dial 911 on speaker right in front of me. "Tell me, would you have called her bluff or just walked away?" The day had started out ordinary. I was in the driveway swapping out spark plugs before heading to my evening shift at the shop. My wrench slipped, scraped my knuckles, and maybe that should have been my warning that things weren't going my way. This truck isn't just a ride. My dad and I rebuilt the engine one Christmas when the snow piled high, and every bolt is a reminder of that promise we made to keep it alive forever. That's when I heard the rumble of a diesel creeping closer. A flatbed tow truck rolled to a stop, followed by a white sedan. Out stepped a woman in a navy blazer, moving like she owned the whole street. My gut told me trouble had arrived, but I figured maybe she was just looking for the wrong house. She didn't hesitate. She marched straight toward me with a clipboard in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. She had that stiff, confident walk I'd seen before from HOA types, but this was sharper practiced. Every motion felt like a performance she'd put on in other neighborhoods before mine. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice sharp as a whistle. "Are you the owner of this vehicle?" She pointed at my truck like it was a broken-down eyesore while the tow driver lined up his rig with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. Before I could answer, she dialed 911 on speaker, calmly telling dispatch my Ford was blocking fire access and needed to be seized right away. The tow driver was already backing in like he'd rehearsed the script. "Yeah, that's my truck," I said, keeping my tone steady. "What's going on here?" She flipped through her papers like an actress playing to an audience. "I'm Claire Monroe, compliance officer for Silver Creek Estates HOA. This vehicle violates fire department. COD E921 subject to immediate removal for public safety." She raised the paper like it was a badge. That knot hit my chest, the one that says you're being played. I scanned the paperwork. City seals, legal numbers, and yet it felt staged, like something copied and polished just enough to look real. "Ma'am, that code doesn't exist." And this truck's been here for years without complaint. Still, the notice accused me of blocking fire access and claimed the HOA had emergency authority to seize property on the spot. Convincing on the surface, but deeply wrong underneath. Then she whipped out a bright red violation sticker. "This is an official notice," she declared, peeling it free. "Once posted, your vehicle qualifies for immediate seizure." She slapped it onto my windshield with practiced hands. I looked closer, everything looked official, but my gut screamed forgery. Since when do HOA officers slap municipal tags like cops? The whole thing felt staged. Claire moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this plenty of times, pulling each paper in order, delivering each line with perfect timing. The tow driver played along too, his chains already clanking as if this was part of a routine they'd practiced together. And I couldn't help but wonder how many other driveways had been stages for this same showdown as he hooked up. I pulled out my phone and hit record. If this went south, I wanted proof. "Hold up," I said loud enough for the camera. "Before you tow, I want these documents verified by the city." Her confidence cracked. "Sir, these are official municipal orders. The driver is authorized to act immediately." But I wasn't buying it. I climbed into the cab, turned the key, and the motor fired smooth and strong. If it's disabled and blocking, how come it runs like new? I revved it hard, then cut it off. Pulled my tape measure from the box and marked the space. From bumper to curb, fence to driveway wide enough for any rescue truck. The numbers didn't lie. Her so-called emergency hazard was nothing but smoke. That's when a patrol cruiser pulled up behind the tow truck. My stomach dropped. Officer James Carter stepped out and took the papers she handed him. I watched his face tighten as he flipped through. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with this code," he said slowly. "And the formatting doesn't match our standard citations." Finally, someone paying attention. He looked from the red tag to the documents, then back at her with suspicion. "These will need to be confirmed at City Hall before a tow can happen." The tow driver shrugged, already unhooking his chains. "No problem, officer." "I'll wait for confirmation." Claire's face turned red, but she pushed harder. "Officer, every minute this truck stays here is a public risk." The fire department demanded immediate removal, but Carter wasn't buying it. He snapped photos of every page and told the tow driver to stand down until verification came from the clerk's office. That's when I saw the mask slipping. Her whole officer act cracked, revealing someone who wasn't used to having her authority questioned. "This is highly irregular," she insisted, but her voice had lost its steel. Carter stayed calm but firm. "Ma'am, whenever I see documents I don't recognize, verification is standard. It's how we protect citizens from fraud." The tow rig pulled off, Carter drove away with copies, and Claire shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't over," she snapped, shoving the loose papers into her leather briefcase. "The municipal compliance audit will move forward, whether you cooperate or not." She spun on her heels, storming back to her silver sedan and tearing out of the cul-de-sac like a teenager throwing a tantrum. Stood frozen in my driveway, clutching a bright crimson violation slip that felt more like a prop than a legal notice, wondering what mess I'd just been dragged into. My pickup was still right where it belonged, but something deep in my gut said this was only the opening move. The porch light above me buzzed faintly, throwing jagged shadows across the cracked concrete. For a split second, I swore I saw her silhouette pause at the far end of the block, headlights idling like she wanted me to feel hunted. The bogus sticker crinkled against my palm, the glue tugging at my skin. The chill that ran through me wasn't from the adhesive, it felt like a warning branded straight onto me. Curtains in neighboring houses shifted. Shadows flitted back into place. Silent witnesses too wary to intervene. That hush carried more weight than yelling. It meant she'd pulled this stunt before, and everyone else had learned to stay quiet. That's when I realized it wasn't about one truck. It was about domination, intimidation, and someone convinced the law could be folded like cheap cardboard. If she'd run this scam on others, then maybe I was the only fool stubborn enough to resist. Later that night, I found a thick envelope tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Inside were more so-called official documents, each one declaring my truck was now classified as city property pending a community safety evaluation. The files all had different formats, seals and letterheads, but every last one pointed to the same chilling claim. Until some mysterious review board gave the green light, my vehicle belonged to the municipality. On the surface, the paperwork looked polished, convincing enough to scare off most people, but the scenes started showing. Phone numbers dialed to dead lines. Reference codes read like they'd been pulled from a hat. And the signatures? Nearly identical, like one hand had signed them all with different pens. Still, staring at documents on city letterhead declaring my truck was no longer mine rattled me in ways I hadn't expected. The professional formatting, the bureaucratic language, it was engineered to worm into your brain and make you wonder if you were genuinely in trouble. When Renee got home from her overnight nursing shift, I laid everything out on the kitchen table under the harsh light. "We need to go through these together," I told her. Something's way off. 2 decades in hospitals had trained her eyes to spot inconsistencies most people overlook. She tapped a page with her finger. "Look at this. These signatures? Same pressure, same slant, just different pens. And here the city seal is blurry, like someone photocopied it instead of printing the real thing." For 2 hours, we dissected every sheet, taking photos, stacking them chronologically. The deeper we went, the clearer it became. Someone had poured an incredible amount of effort into manufacturing believable fakes. But why? It was a decent truck, sure not a collector's prize. Why orchestrate this whole elaborate charade unless the vehicle wasn't the real target? Unless I just stumbled into something bigger. By the time I locked up for the night, the red violation tag on my windshield glowed under the porch light like an omen. Tomorrow I'd start making calls, fire department, city clerk, maybe even the municipal attorney. But tonight, staring at that fake warning, I couldn't shake the sense that I was up against something far nastier than an HOA power trip. Somebody had nearly stolen my truck with forged government paperwork, and they'd almost gotten away with it. Wednesday morning. Fury woke me. Not irritation, real anger. The kind that coils in your gut when someone tries to rob you of your rights and expects you to bow your head. Coffee in hand, I spread the forged papers across the dining table under Renee's magnifying lamp and swore I'd prove them counterfeit beyond question or brace for the storm if they weren't. Montage in my head. Close-ups of mismatched fonts, off-center margins, aerial headers clashing with Times New Roman body text. Renee comparing city seals on our laptop to the crisp one on the real government site, her finger jabbing the differences with growing certainty. Pages held to the light, nothing but copy paper, no watermarks, no fibers, no texture. I clenched my jaw, dialing the numbers on the letters. The first? Disconnected. The second? Rang into silence. The third? Connected me with a bewildered retiree wondering why strangers kept calling about city violations. The fourth? A teenager's voicemail. "You've reached Tyler." I froze, the name hitting me like a brick. Tyler Grant, her own son. The so-called municipal emergency office was being run out of a kid's cell phone. A scam so brazen it bordered on parody. Back on my laptop, I punched in code after code. Everyone returned nothing. Fire code 847A? Empty. Violation protocol 211? Blank. Emergency Directive 97? Doesn't exist. The screen filled with error messages, each one mocking me louder than the last. My chest tightened, throat dry. This wasn't sloppy paperwork. It was a carefully spun web design to look unbreakable. I pushed further. Renee promised to borrow a UV light from the hospital, and I pictured those crime shows where invisible ink glows under violet beams, revealing the truth. Maybe we'd find something. Or maybe just more blank lies. Meanwhile, I called the fire department directly, pacing the kitchen floor with sweat dampening my collar. Each ring stretched time thinner until the dispatcher finally answered. Her calm voice only sharpened the edge in my chest when she confirmed. No record of complaints at my address. No violations. Nothing. And that fire code you mentioned? She added after a pause. Sir, we don't use numbering like that. My pulse thundered. The call was transferred to the fire marshal himself. His voice was steady, final. Stonebridge Heights has never been flagged. No legitimate emergency access issue existed, the marshal's assistant said bluntly. An HOA compliance officer has no authority to slap municipal tags on private vehicles. Her words landed like a gavel, final, heavy, and it felt for a moment like a coffin lid being shut. If anyone tells you otherwise, report it as fraud. The assistant printed out the real fire access rules for me to compare. The differences were immediate. Genuine codes listed exact vehicle dimensions, access clearances, and step-by-step emergency response protocols. Claire's documents? Vague, bureaucratic-sounding nonsense about public safety optimization with no technical specs, language meant to intimidate, not instruct. That afternoon I drove to City Hall with stacks of photocopies. The municipal clerk took one look and shook her head. Sir, these aren't authentic, she said. The formatting's wrong, the reference numbers don't match our system, and most of these departments don't exist. She pulled real citations from a file drawer and showed me the security features and layout, standards that were missing from Claire's papers. Whoever made those forgeries had put in effort, but they weren't real. Then the clerk told me something that chilled me. Someone had called asking for document templates a few weeks earlier. A woman claiming she was doing research on HOA compliance had requested samples of citation formats. The caller's description matched Claire exactly. In other words, Claire had phoned ahead to collect examples to copy. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment hustle. It was planned. The records showed template requests made 3 weeks before the tow rig. Show up, specific requests for emergency access, citations and violation notices. I watched the clerk fill out a formal fraud complaint right there. Document fraud using government letterhead is a serious felony, she explained. Big fines, possible jail time. She said the complaint would be forwarded to the city attorney and the county fraud unit. You did the right thing bringing this to us, she said. This kind of scam erodes trust in public institutions. It must be prosecuted. The city attorney's office scheduled me in, and Faith asked me to bring originals and all evidence. Vindicated but uneasy, I left City Hall thinking about how far this scam might reach. That evening, Renee brought over the UV lamp. We dimmed the dining room and set the fake papers next to official city copies. Under the purple light, the truth was brutal. Real documents glowed with watermarks, special inks, and embedded fibers. Claire's forgeries? Plain printer paper, no security features at all. Under UV, they looked exactly like they were, high-quality printouts. Nothing more. The UV also exposed faint traces of correction fluid on several pages, edits, and rewrites. Someone had tested and refined these documents, iterating drafts until they looked convincing. This was no sloppy one-night scam. This was methodical, premeditated criminal work. I even dusted the truck for prints. Crime shows taught me how to lift prints with powder and tape, so I got to work. The door handles and windshield gave up several clear impressions, which I lifted and mounted on index cards. Maybe they wouldn't all hold up in court, But they were more than nothing if this escalated. Under UV, the red violation sticker told its own story. No tamper-evident adhesive, no special municipal substrate, just ordinary household sticker paper and run-of-the-mill glue. Someone had printed their own tags at home and stuck them on with office supply adhesive. I photographed everything, normal light, UV light, creating a visual record that made the deception obvious. By Thursday morning, I'd put together a thorough case file, photocopies annotated with inconsistencies, photos comparing fake and real documents, UV images showing absent security features, contact confirmations from city departments, and the fingerprint lifts. It looked like the kind of evidence prosecutors like to see. Still, the why nagged at me. The truck wasn't priceless or unique. I wasn't behind on payments or tangled in a dispute that would merit this kind of elaborate fraud. Claire's HOA role was the only link, but even that didn't explain the lengths she'd gone to. Unless the truck was just a decoy, and I'd stumbled into something much bigger, that night's sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying the sophistication of the forgeries, the premeditation in calling City Hall for templates, and Claire's brazen confidence in my driveway. This wasn't someone who'd cracked under pressure. This was someone who'd planned every line in the script and expected no one to fight back. This was the work of someone who'd done it before, someone schooled in scams and intimidation, convinced they were clever enough to get away with it. Around midnight, I stepped outside to check the truck and decided to leave my phone recording the driveway overnight. If Claire or anyone else tried to tamper with the vehicle or drop more fake papers, I wanted video proof. As I angled the camera, my stomach dropped. Fresh footprints pressed into the flower bed beside the drive, definitely not mine. Someone had been circling my truck while I slept. The game had just escalated, and Claire Monroe wasn't about to let this go because Plan A failed. Friday morning flipped a script. While I was skimming the night footage, Mrs. Caldwell from across the street knocked on my door. She's an elderly widow who mostly keeps to herself, so seeing her before 8 surprised me. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, hands trembling around an envelope. "But I heard about your truck and you need to see this." Inside were documents that made my skin crawl. City letterhead notices saying her vintage motorcycle violated Noise Ordinance N317 and would be transferred to the Community Youth Program for benefit of local teens. The formatting matched the style of the bogus papers on my truck. Same seals, same official-looking department names. What froze me was the signature at the bottom. The same handwriting as my truck notices, only slightly disguised. These motorcycle notices were even more sophisticated than mine. Whoever wrote them had researched Mrs. Caldwell's bike, make, model year, and cited fake decibel limits and complaint procedures that read convincing to anyone not trained to spot fraud. It was obvious. The person behind this had done their homework on municipal language and on their targets. Mrs. Caldwell told me Claire had personally delivered the packet 3 days earlier, on the same day my truck was targeted. According to the fake paperwork, her motorcycle was a public nuisance and should be donated to Tyler Grant's volunteer community service program for neighborhood outreach. Like most neighbors, she'd been too scared to challenge the papers. Who contests a city? Fear and confusion had kept folks quiet. She also told me Claire had spent weeks asking detailed questions about the bike, maintenance, storage, how often she rode it. I thought Claire was just being friendly. She wasn't. She was gathering intel. The premeditation kept getting clearer. Next, I walked the block. If Claire was running this across the neighborhood, there would be more victims. The man next door, Mr. Morales, answered reluctantly, then disappeared and returned clutching a packet of his own. His papers claimed his garage workshop violated Property Maintenance Code PM 894 and that his tools must be redistributed. under a municipal asset sharing program with Tyler Grant's initiative listed as the beneficiary. The pattern snapped into focus. Claire was methodically targeting residents with valuable items, using forged municipal authority to redirect property to her son. This wasn't random theft. It was organized fraud with a precise purpose. Mr. Morales's notice listed specific tool brands and models, supposedly cataloged after an inspection. Someone had physically observed his workshop and recorded what was inside before inventing violations. The three of us sat comparing pages and trading stories. Mr. Morales said Claire had been asking neighbors about valuable possessions for months, claiming she was compiling an emergency asset inventory. Mrs. Caldwell remembered Claire complimenting her motorcycle and probing about upkeep and storage. Piece by piece, the scope of the scheme revealed itself. They'd clearly scoped out both of them in advance the same way. I must have been when Marissa was plotting her stunt with my truck. Mr. Jensen had even more unsettling details about how she gathered intel. She once asked to borrow my tape measure, claimed she was planning some home upgrades, but I caught her sizing up the space in my workshop and snapping photos of my tool racks. Back then, I figured she wanted to copy my setup for her own place. Now, I knew she'd been cataloging everything for those bogus violation letters. I suggested we meet later in my garage to put our evidence in order. Word spread quietly, and by mid-afternoon half the block had trickled in, each carrying their own stack of suspicious papers. One family had a notice about parking, another about lawn equipment, someone else about storage issues. The wording varied, but the pattern was the same: phony documents, fake authority, and Brandon Yates' so-called youth program waiting to benefit. Seeing all the forged paperwork laid out together chilled me. But what hit harder was the relief on people's faces. They weren't alone anymore. Someone else had noticed the lies and was willing to push back. What struck me most was how deliberate Marissa's tactics were. She'd spent months befriending neighbors, probing for details about their property and zeroing in on folks least likely to challenge official notices. Elderly residents like Mrs. Palmer, immigrants like Mr. Jensen who might hesitate to question authority, working families like mine who couldn't risk expensive legal fights. She had profiled our entire neighborhood and chosen her victims with precision. The Thompsons revealed she'd even attended their classic car show last summer, asking pointed questions about restoration costs and resale values. At the time, they thought she was just a curious neighbor. Now it was obvious she was evaluating targets for her scheme. By the time every fake notice was spread across my workbench, the scale of the operation was staggering. Dozens of fabricated citations, each professionally formatted, complete with phone numbers that went nowhere, departments that didn't exist, and laws that were completely made up. Someone had poured serious time and money into this fraud. This wasn't a desperate parent bending rules for their kid. It was a calculated con. The most unsettling detail came when Mrs. Palmer mentioned overhearing Brandon brag to his buddies weeks earlier about finally scoring some real wheels long before any of the violation letters surfaced. He'd claimed his mom had an inside track through her HOA ties. That timing meant Marissa had marked my truck as her prize before she ever dreamed up the fire lane. Excuse. Mr. Jensen added another red flag he'd spotted: Brandon driving different vehicles around the neighborhood lately, including a motorcycle that matched one a former neighbor owned before moving out suddenly. At first, I figured he was just borrowing from friends, Jensen admitted. Now I'm not so sure those friends ever existed. That raised a terrifying possibility. This scam had been running far longer than we realized. The Martinez family chimed in too. They'd noticed Brandon using heavy-duty landscaping tools worth thousands, even though his family had never been serious about yard work. Looking back, maybe those tools belonged to other victims who were pressured into handing them over. Maria Martinez said. By the end of our garage meeting, we'd pieced together at least 8 households targeted in the same pattern. The proof was undeniable, and the group agreed Marissa and Brandon needed to face charges. But beneath the anger was a current of fear. If she was bold enough to forge government documents and impersonate city officials, what might she do when cornered? Since I'd already filed my complaint with the clerk's office, I offered to lead our collective case. We set a follow-up meeting for Monday night to organize evidence and prepare for the authorities. As the neighbors filed out of my garage, each carrying copies of the fraudulent documents we'd compared, I felt something I hadn't felt since the ordeal began: hope. We weren't scattered victims anymore. We were a united community holding undeniable proof of a criminal scheme. That evening, Claire and I spread everything across the dining table: 24 forged papers, contact details for 8 affected families, photos of suspicious activity, and a timeline revealing the scam had been running far longer than we'd guessed. The scope was staggering, but so was the evidence. Any prosecutor who saw it would have a rock-solid case for multiple felony fraud charges. But I never got the chance to submit it. That same night, my truck disappeared without a trace. They'd slipped up, though, leaving behind a receipt that looked official, complete with Marissa's signature authorizing the transfer to her son, Brandon Yates. My heart raced as I held the document. This wasn't just theft anymore, it was escalation. They were getting reckless, but with this paper in hand, I knew we finally had them cornered. By Monday evening, the city council chambers were packed to standing room only. Our sleepy suburb rarely saw this much turnout, but word had spread that residents planned to expose a fraud scheme during public comment, and half the town had shown up to witness it. I sat in the front row, my evidence folder heavy in my lap, trying to steady my nerves. You don't get many chances to address city leadership directly, and I wanted every word to hit. Around me, neighbors carried their own folders, Mrs. Palmer clutching hers like a lifeline, Mr. Jensen quietly reading his notes, the Martinez family filling an entire row, their kids solemn and alert. I'd never seen the community so united. When public comment opened, my name was called first. The council leaned forward, cautious but skeptical, as I introduced myself and began. Over the past week, my neighbors and I uncovered an organized fraud ring using forged city documents, fake violation notices, and impersonation of municipal authority to intimidate residents. The room hushed. I held up copies of the counterfeit citations. These claim to be official city paperwork, but the departments don't exist. The legal codes are made up, and the phone numbers lead nowhere. The scam uses fabricated authority to target property, and every confiscation funnels back to Brandon Yates, the son of HOA officer Marissa Yates, who personally delivered many of these documents. The city attorney suddenly leaned forward. "Sir, do you have physical copies of these documents?" I carried my folder to him and watched his face darken as he flipped through the pages. Before he could speak, Marissa leapt to her feet, pale and shaking. "This is just a misunderstanding of municipal procedure," she stammered, but the attorney cut her short. "These are not legitimate city records. This is deliberate criminal fraud." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Mayor Whitaker's voice grew heavy. "Mr. Collins, you're alleging someone has fabricated government documents and coerced residents into giving up their property under false authority?" "That's correct, sir. At least 8 households are confirmed, all following the same pattern." From the back, Fire Chief Daniels rose in his uniform. He'd only come for budget talks, but my testimony clearly struck him. "If I may, counsel, Mr. Collins contacted us last week about supposed fire lane violations. I can confirm we have no such records. In fact, HOA officers have no power to issue municipal citations at all." The chamber buzzed as he continued. Code 742, which appears on these documents, doesn't even exist. Our ordinances use a different numbering system entirely. Driveway clearances in Brookstone Grove exceed all fire access requirements. We've never logged a single complaint. Whoever drafted these papers went to great lengths to look authentic, but they are complete fabrications. Impersonating government authority is a felony offense. The chief's detailed breakdown shattered Marissa's narrative. Then Mrs. Palmer took the stand. Her voice quivered, but her words carried weight. This woman came to my door with official paperwork demanding I surrender my motorcycle for some community program. I was terrified I'd be charged if I refused. She used fake government authority to scare an elderly widow into giving up her property. The emotional punch was undeniable. Council members scribbled notes, exchanged looks of alarm. Double quotes Mrs. Palmer. Councilwoman Reyes asked, "Did she give you any chance to verify these documents with the city?" "No," she answered firmly. She said it was urgent and told me contacting the city would only make things worse. One by one, other residents followed, each recounting their version of the same scam. Fake parking citations, bogus landscaping violations, midnight visits where Marissa shoved forged notices into their hands. The details shifted, but the script never did. Fear, pressure, fines, and Brandon Yates waiting as the beneficiary. By then, even council members were glancing toward the police chief, bracing for fallout. The shuffle of papers and the scratch of pens filled the tense silence. Councilman Harlan finally asked, "Mr. Collins, in your opinion, how many others could be affected that we don't yet know about?" I paused, then answered carefully. Given how systematic this was, I believe there could be dozens more. Some may have complied out of fear. Others may have moved away, thinking the city itself was against them. Mayor Whitaker called a recess so the attorney and police chief could examine the evidence more closely. I overheard stunned whispers from the council table. "In 2 decades of service, I've never seen anything like this," one said. "Weaponizing fake government authority to rob residents is beyond unconscionable. The sin fake government unconscionable." City attorney was already photographing evidence, dialing contacts, and treating it like what it was, a criminal case demanding immediate investigation. They used the recess to trade more names and clues. Mrs. Caldwell discovered 2 other elderly neighbors who'd also been visited, and too frightened to report it. Mr. Jensen learned that several immigrant families had been singled out with bogus compliance notices designed to prey on their hesitancy to challenge official orders. The fraud's reach widened even as we sat in that chamber. When the meeting resumed, the city attorney spoke plainly to the council and everyone in the room. Based on tonight's evidence, the city will file a formal complaint with the county prosecutor for multiple counts of document fraud, government impersonation, and conspiracy to commit theft. He added that federal charges could follow. Using counterfeit seals and letterheads can trigger federal counterfeiting statutes. "This investigation will be a top priority," he said, "and we will prosecute to the fullest extent." Then the mayor read a statement that sent a chill through me. The city officially declared any documents allegedly issued by municipal departments to Riverside Meadows residents regarding violations, citations, or confiscation orders to be fraudulent and without legal force. He instructed anyone who'd received suspicious paperwork to contact police immediately and not to surrender any property based on those documents. Police Chief Morales took the podium and announced a formal criminal investigation. The department would coordinate with the county prosecutor and the FBI if federal crimes were implicated, and urged residents to preserve evidence and be ready for detective interviews. He also outlined immediate protections, increased patrols in Riverside Meadows, and a fraud hotline for suspicious activity. "If you receive questionable municipal documents, call us first," he said. The official response was everything our neighborhood coalition had hoped for. Relief and vindication washed over me as the meeting wrapped, but unease lingered. Marissa and Brandon had invested too much to go quietly. Desperation could make them dangerous. Walking back to my truck after the meeting, my blood ran cold. The red violation tag that had clung to my windshield for days was gone, ripped off roughly, leaving adhesive and paper shards behind. Someone had been at my truck while I was inside the council chamber. The timing was deliberate. They were watching, tracking, and planning their next move. The drive home felt paranoid. Every rearview glance, every car behind me felt like a tail. I looped through extra streets to shake anyone following me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was convinced that exposing the fraud had put a bullseye on my back. Renee met me at the door, worry already written on her face. "How did it go?" she asked. I told her about the city's response and the missing tag. "They know we've got them boxed in," I said, checking every lock. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. That night I expanded our security. More cameras, cloud backups of every file, and duplicate evidence packages for the neighborhood coalition. If Marissa and Brandon retaliated, I wanted to be ready. The council victory felt huge, but I had the uneasy sense the real fight was just beginning. They'd already shown they'd commit felonies. Now they had nothing left to lose. Tuesday morning a call changed everything. "Mr. Collins, this is Ava Coleman from the state attorney's office," the voice said. Professional but warm, papers rustling faintly in the background. "I've been assigned to review the municipal fraud matter from your council presentation. I need to meet and review your evidence. Are you available this afternoon?" State involvement meant the case wasn't just local anymore. Ava told me my packet fit a pattern of similar municipal impersonation schemes running across counties. "We've tracked comparable operations for months," she said, "but your community's documentation is the most thorough we've seen. This could be the break we need to dismantle a wider network." We met in a courthouse conference room that afternoon. Ava was younger than I pictured, mid-30s, razor-sharp, the kind of prosecutor who lives in case law. "Mr. Collins, you need to understand the gravity of this," she said, spreading my files across the table. "Government impersonation and forging official seals can carry federal penalties 10, even 20 years in prison in the right circumstances." The review went on for hours. Ava photographed every page, took meticulous notes on timelines, and drilled into the methods Marissa and Brandon used. She examined the fake letterheads under a magnifier and commented on the quality of the printing and the obvious research behind the formatting. This wasn't backyard forgery, this was professional grade, criminal work. What drew her particular attention was the pattern of targeting vulnerable residents, elderly homeowners, recent immigrants, people unlikely to push back. That detail, she said, added both moral weight and prosecutorial clarity to the case. The evidence showed clear profiling of victims least likely to question official paperwork: elderly homeowners, immigrant families, working households without legal support. Ava explained that this level of targeting revealed premeditation and criminal sophistication, which elevated the charges dramatically. The case could even qualify under state RICO statutes, opening the door to organized crime penalties far harsher than standard fraud. She also shared troubling intelligence. Investigators had tracked nearly a dozen other neighborhoods reporting suspicious municipal notices and attempted property seizures. The tactics were identical: same formatting, same claims of emergency authority, same focus on vulnerable residents. The scheme wasn't isolated. It was part of something much larger. Ava understood the pressure it placed on families like mine. They're counting on the financial and emotional toll to push people into compliance, even when they suspect the documents are fake, she said. That's extortion disguised as legal authority. She promised the state would seek full restitution for every cost: attorney fees, lost wages, damages. When we win, and we will win, they'll pay for everything. Her plan surprised me with its boldness. She wanted me to record a conversation with Marissa at the HOA office, get her to outline her process in her own words. Ava handed me a small recorder and coached me on the phrasing. Don't accuse. Just ask about the steps, who granted authority, what departments they worked with. The goal was to let Marissa incriminate herself. The legal picture was staggering. Government impersonation alone carried 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Document fraud added another 5 to 10. Conspiracy to commit theft meant 3 to 7 more. And if Brandon had knowingly assisted, he could face adult prosecution despite his young age. Marissa is looking at decades behind bars if convicted, Ava said. And based on your evidence, conviction is highly likely. The federal layer made it even more severe. Forged seals and letterheads violated counterfeiting laws. Mailing or emailing fake documents triggered mail and wire fraud charges. If the operation stretched across state borders and it looked like it had, then federal racketeering charges could apply. The penalties were piling higher than I ever imagined. So Wednesday afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with Marissa under the pretense of resolving our dispute. The HOA office sat in a bland suburban complex, her nameplate mounted proudly on the corner office overlooking the pool. She welcomed me with sugary warmth, likely hoping to talk me into dropping my complaints. Jordan, I'm so glad you reached out. I think there's been a misunderstanding with municipal compliance. The recorder in my pocket caught everything. I asked carefully scripted questions. Marissa, I'm unclear on how the HOA obtained authority to issue municipal violation notices. Can you explain the process? Her answer was exactly what Ava predicted. Well, we coordinate closely with certain city offices to keep compliance efficient. Rather than waiting for slow bureaucratic steps, we adapt municipal templates to handle immediate safety concerns. When I pressed her on which offices she worked with, her explanations became damning. The fire marshal's office gave us templates for educational purposes. We've just streamlined them to resolve violations quickly. She was openly admitting to fabricating official documents with no actual authority. Marissa seemed almost eager to elaborate, convinced that the technical details would impress me. The key is cutting through delays. Our procedures allow us to respond immediately while still protecting the community. In reality, she was describing a fake justice system that existed only in her imagination. Tone shifted when I pressed her harder on legality. She leaned back, eyes cold, and said with chilling conviction, Jordan, sometimes community safety requires faster action than the city can provide. We can't wait weeks for approvals when issues demand immediate attention. Her words were smooth, but they revealed her mindset, an invented authority wrapped in urgency. When I mentioned that neighbors had received similar notices, her mask slipped into pride. It's more effective when we process multiple violations at once, she boasted. Efficiency, she claimed, was the key to safety. The implication was staggering. She wasn't targeting a few households. She was running an entire fraudulent system. The recorder caught it all. The most telling moment came when I brought up Brandon. Marissa's expression softened into smug satisfaction. He volunteers to maintain confiscated properties until compliance is met, she said. It benefits the whole neighborhood. Her words might have sounded polished, but underneath the careful phrasing was a plain admission: theft disguised as charity. Her son was profiting from every seizure, which tied motive, conspiracy, and intent together in one breath. Then came the revelation that froze me. She leaned forward, her voice lowering as if sharing a privileged secret. We've been refining these methods for more than 2 years across multiple neighborhoods. The old municipal process is too slow for modern safety. My stomach twisted. This wasn't improvisation. It was a confession of long-running, organized fraud on a scale far larger than our subdivision. Behind the veneer of professionalism, I saw her raw arrogance, the pride of someone convinced she had created her own private empire of authority. As our conversation wound down, Marissa left me with one last remark that sealed everything. "Jordan, I hope you understand we're simply helping the community maintain standards. Sometimes that requires creative solutions to bureaucratic red tape." Creative solutions. That was her euphemism for systematic, organized crime. I shook her hand, thanked her for her time, and walked out knowing I had just recorded enough incriminating statements to guarantee prosecution. Would you have exposed a scheme like this publicly, or handled it quietly through legal channels? Let me know what you would have done differently in the comments. Driving back to meet Ava felt surreal. In under an hour, I'd captured an HOA officer admitting to government impersonation, document forgery, and conspiracy to steal property. The arrogance that had fueled her crimes had just guaranteed her downfall. Ava's reaction was immediate and emphatic. "This is prosecutorial gold," she said, her eyes lighting up as she reviewed my notes and listened to key clips. Marissa had confessed to fabricating documents, impersonating officials, and running a structured system for confiscating property. She even confirmed that Brandon was the designated beneficiary, which tied the conspiracy together neatly. The smile on Ava's face told me how certain she was about convictions. More importantly, the recording gave investigators something bigger, proof that the fraud extended beyond our community. Her reference to working across multiple neighborhoods gives us probable cause to expand into other jurisdictions, Ava explained. This could be the evidence we need to unravel an entire network of organized fraudsters preying on vulnerable residents. That evening, I called an emergency meeting of our neighborhood coalition. In the garage, surrounded by folding chairs and nervous faces, I explained the breakthrough. We weren't just victims anymore, we were witnesses in a major criminal case. Relief washed across the group, but my sense of victory was shadowed by unease. Marissa and Brandon had to know the walls were closing in. Desperate people didn't simply accept consequences, they escalated. I checked locks, armed the cameras, and double-checked our cloud backups before bed. The recorder had given us a decisive victory, but I feared it had also provoked them into something reckless. Tomorrow would bring either arrests or retaliation. And based on everything I'd seen of their character, I doubted it would end peacefully. Thursday morning, my phone rang with the call that confirmed the next move. "Mr. Bryant, this is Ava Coleman. We're ready to file criminal charges, but I need you to meet me at the impound lot immediately. Brandon Drake just tried to sell custom parts from your truck online, and we have a chance to catch him in the act of trafficking stolen property." Her tone carried urgency. This was the break we had been waiting for. The Drakes had finally made the mistake that would guarantee their conviction. Ava explained that investigators had been monitoring online marketplaces as part of the wider fraud probe. Brandon had been listing parts under multiple seller accounts, but the serial numbers and photos matched items flagged as stolen. He'd gotten greedy and sloppy, leaving a digital trail that prosecutors could trace straight back to him. The impound lot was a bleak place, ringed with chain-link fencing and razor wire, filled with vehicles trapped in legal limbo. My truck sat in the far corner, stripped down like a carcass. The custom exhaust I'd installed months earlier was gone. The alloy wheels I'd bought with overtime pay were replaced with cheap steel rims. Supervisor looked sheepish as he explained. Brandon had come by repeatedly with official-looking paperwork, reflective vests, and forms stamped so convincingly that no one questioned him. They thought he was conducting legitimate inspections. In reality, he had been systematically stripping vehicles and selling the parts. Detective Martinez from the County Fraud Unit confirmed it, showing me his laptop. "Take a look at this," he said, rotating the screen. A listing popped up. Chrome exhaust system, lightly used, fits 2010 to 2015 pickup trucks. Posted just the night before. The photos had been taken right there in the lot. My stomach sank. The exhaust was unmistakably mine, down to the custom brackets I'd welded myself. Brandon hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. He was selling stolen property in broad daylight, and we finally had him. The detective scrolled through 3 more listings, each showcasing parts stripped from my truck custom mats, a bed cover, and the fog lights I had personally installed. "He's been dismantling your vehicle piece by piece and selling the parts for cash," Detective Ramirez explained. "That's trafficking in stolen property, a felony entirely separate from the initial fraud." The brazenness stunned me. It wasn't enough that they'd taken my truck using forged documents. They'd been cannibalizing it for profit while it sat in official custody. Ramirez then revealed that the online probe had uncovered a far wider operation. At least a dozen vehicles had been targeted through Marcus's accounts, with stolen parts valued at over $50,000. What once looked like isolated fraud had been exposed as a major theft. Ring.Ava broke down the legal weight of what we'd found as we logged the missing equipment. "This proves premeditated theft. They never intended to return your vehicle. The entire point was to seize, strip, and sell. The conspiracy is undeniable now. That reality meant steeper charges and far less room for plea bargaining. The state was no longer dealing with technical fraud, it was full-scale organized crime. The impound manager provided entry logs confirming Marcus had visited multiple times that week, each occasion neatly aligning with disappearing parts. "Honestly, I thought it odd someone his age was conducting inspections," the supervisor admitted. "But he always had official-looking forms and precise knowledge about the cases. We had no reason to suspect theft." Meanwhile, Ramirez had already partnered with online security teams to trace Marcus's sales. Over $4,000 in vehicle parts sold in just 6 months. And your truck wasn't his first victim. This was systematic. What had begun as a personal fraud case now stood revealed as an active criminal enterprise embedded in municipal systems, financial documents obtained by court order painted an even darker picture. Marcus was cycling the illicit proceeds through multiple accounts and payment apps, laundering the income while reinvesting in equipment for producing more forged paperwork. The theft ring was feeding the fraud ring a closed loop of escalating crime. Forensics confirmed it. Ultraviolet swabs revealed fingerprints, DNA, and substances that didn't belong in my truck. Marcus had been treating it like his personal ride. Ramirez pointed to the diagnostic readout, over 300 miles logged since impound. GPS shows trips into neighboring counties. He's been expanding his fraud network using your stolen vehicle. Ava served me a court order declaring the impound invalid from the start. The judge ruled that the original seizure relied on falsified documents, she explained. Your truck is to be released immediately, with all costs transferred to the defendants. After more than a week of limbo, I was finally getting my property back, but in a condition that told the whole story of their true intent. That's when the inevitable happened. As we wrapped up documentation, Marcus arrived, clutching more counterfeit papers, probably ready to strip the next set of parts. The moment he saw marked cruisers, panic spread across his face. Ramirez wasted no time placing him in cuffs. "You can't arrest me," Marcus protested. "I've got authorization from the Municipal Compliance Board." He was still clinging to his fabricated authority even as the cuffs locked shut. Ramirez read him his rights with cool finality. "Son, there is no Municipal Compliance Board. You've been running a theft ring off forged credentials. And the evidence is overwhelming. The arrest file spoke volumes. fraud, impersonation, theft, trafficking, counterfeiting, money laundering, misuse of seized property. The list filled pages. Federal sentencing guidelines alone threaten 20 to 30 years, with state penalties likely tacking on another 2 decades. We're looking at 40 to 60 years combined, Ava stated grimly. These are mandatory felonies. There's no negotiating down, but the most damning revelations came from Marcus's own phone. Texts between him and his mother exposed the inner workings of their scheme. The old guy with the motorcycle bought every word used the fire marshal letterhead again. Can you print more? One message read. Another was chilling in its precision. Caleb's truck is perfect. Custom mods alone will clear $5,000 easy. Worse still, the text referenced earlier compliance operations, proving this wasn't their first attempt. Ramirez shook his head. We'll need to coordinate across county lines. This is interstate fraud. They've been targeting multiple communities for months. The cruelty of their selection criteria turned my stomach. Stick to elderly immigrants, they won't check city records. Single moms are usually too swamped to verify paperwork. Weren't just stealing, they were deliberately exploiting society's most vulnerable. Evelyn's arrest followed within hours. With Marcus's phone data and her own on-record confessions, detectives found her at home, bags packed, bank accounts drained, and shredded papers scattered across the floor. Ms. Lane, Ramirez said firmly, you're under arrest for conspiracy, impersonation, document forgery, and racketeering under state RICO law. Her indictment went even further than Marcus's, naming her as the true architect of the criminal machine. Federal prosecutors were now circling, preparing to dismantle the empire she thought she had built. This is proof of calculated fraud that preyed on vulnerable families across multiple neighborhoods, Ava stated firmly. Under federal sentencing guidelines, Ms. Lane could be looking at a lifetime behind bars if convicted on every count. The search of Evelyn's home exposed the full machinery of her criminal network, industrial printers, forged municipal templates, and meticulously compiled dossiers on dozens of residents. Files detailed bank accounts, family situations, and even predictions on who was least likely to challenge authority. Detective Ramirez called it what it was: organized crime operating at a professional level. That evening, I finally drove my battered truck home. The violation stickers were gone, replaced by court documents ordering full restitution. The same driveway that had been ground zero for their fraud looked strangely calm in the twilight. But the true victory wasn't reclaiming the vehicle. It was knowing that a predatory scheme had been dismantled before it could claim more victims. When I walked inside, Renee was waiting. Relief washed across her face the moment she saw me. "It's finished?" she asked, though my expression already told her the answer. "It's finished," I said. "They're both in custody, facing decades, and the prosecution has everything needed to lock them away." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without tension. Yet even as peace settled in, I couldn't stop thinking about the other families, immigrant households too afraid to challenge forged authority, elderly residents intimidated into giving up property. The fraud ring had been stopped, but the scars left on community trust would take much longer to heal. 6 months later, I sat inside a federal courtroom, watching Evelyn Lane stand before Judge Whitaker for sentencing. The prosecution's case had been devastating, revealing a multi-state operation that had targeted more than 40 families over 2 years. Seeing her in an orange jumpsuit instead of her polished blazer felt like justice finally catching up with arrogance. The courtroom was packed with victims. Some had driven hours just to witness the outcome. Mrs. Preston clutched her handbag in the front row, while the Johnson family filled an entire bench. The Morales children, now old enough to grasp the truth, stared at the woman who had nearly stolen everything from their parents. The fraud prosecutor spoke with unshakable precision. "Your Honor, The defendants engineered a sophisticated enterprise aimed at seniors, immigrants, and working families, those least likely to question official-looking paperwork. They studied government formatting, invested in professional-grade printers, and built templates to mimic authority. This was not opportunism. This was deliberate exploitation of trust in civic institutions. Then came the most chilling revelation. Spreadsheets recovered from Evelyn's computers cataloged potential victims like business prospects, income levels, family size, vulnerability ratings. Fraud wasn't just a crime to her, it was a business model. Ava's presentation sealed the case. Bank records showed Marcus had funneled over $70,000 in stolen sales, with online listings documenting systematic trafficking of vehicle parts. They hadn't only stolen cars and property, they'd stolen faith in local government and the sense of safety from every resident they targeted. Victim statements that followed were heartbreaking. Mrs. Preston described sleepless nights after receiving bogus violation letters, terrified of losing her home. An aging veteran stood with tears in his eyes as he recalled signing over his beloved motorcycle. "I served my country for 3 decades, and I trusted that an official seal meant something," he choked. These people destroyed that trust. They stole more than property, they stole years of my life. Others followed immigrants, single parents, hard-working families, each recounting fear, humiliation, and betrayal. The weight of voices pressed down on the courtroom until even the judge leaned forward, listening intently. This trial wasn't only about theft, it was about the theft of trust itself. The most damning evidence came from Marcus's own digital footprint. Text logs and social posts revealed him mocking his victims, bragging about easy money from clueless neighbors, and posting photos of stolen goods with captions like, "Community service pays when Mom makes the papers." The cruelty and arrogance were laid bare for everyone to see. What happened here wasn't desperation dressed as crime. It was calculated greed, predators targeting the vulnerable for easy profit. The prosecution showed how the defendants even tried to intimidate witnesses. They placed threatening calls to victims who had filed complaints, warning them to back off or face more legal trouble. The prosecutor stated plainly, this pattern of intimidation continued after their arrests, showing no remorse and ongoing criminal intent. Judge Whitaker didn't soften his words at sentencing. They abused public trust to commit organized fraud against those least able to fight back. This kind of exploitation undermines civic life itself and demands maximum punishment. Samantha was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with 5 years supervised release. Marcus received 8 years plus 3 years probation. The court emphasized that he hadn't been a passive accomplice. He created listings, arranged fraudulent sales, and pocketed tens of thousands. Both were ordered to repay over $200,000 to 43 victims across 3 states. The judge noted how they deliberately targeted people unlikely to question fake authority, making their actions especially cruel. Restitution covered everything: property losses, legal fees, emotional damages, and punitive costs. My truck repairs and lost wages were paid in full. Mrs. Harlan restored her vintage motorcycle and secured her home. Mr. Jensen replaced his stolen tools and was compensated for the months of stress. The conviction carried lasting consequences. Samantha and Marcus were banned from ever serving on HOAs, city councils, or nonprofits. Their records barred them from jobs requiring access to official documents. Every HOA decision Samantha had touched in the last 5 years was re-examined. HOS Insurance Company later settled a civil suit for $500,000. That money funded neighborhood-wide improvements, surveillance cameras, better lighting, and new oversight rules requiring background checks for board members. Months later, I received a letter from the FBI. My documentation, they wrote, had helped uncover a national fraud scheme tied to organized crime. The evidence from our case was being used to pursue RICO charges across 12 states. What began as a small neighborhood dispute had become a key part of dismantling a nationwide criminal operation. Our community didn't just recover, we grew stronger. We formed a permanent residents association, created education programs on fraud prevention, built emergency funds, and established communication systems to protect each other. Ironically, Marcus's court-ordered service meant working under my supervision to restore my truck. Watching him reinstall the exact parts he once stole was poetic justice. One day he admitted, "I thought we were clever for getting things without paying. But we weren't clever, we were just predators." The people we hurt didn't deserve it. Whether genuine or not, the acknowledgement mattered. But the most powerful moment came when Samantha, in her prison uniform, was forced to read a public apology. In that courtroom, she admitted that every document had been fake, every claim of authority false, and every victim chosen for their vulnerability. The same woman who once waved fraudulent papers in my driveway now stood stripped of power, confessing to it all. Today, my truck sits restored where this nightmare began, only now it carries a reminder. Fraud can be fought, and communities can heal stronger than before. And if you want more real HOA stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to Listen HOA Stories, because the truth behind neighborhood power can be stranger than fiction. Then came the most chilling revelation. Spreadsheets recovered from Evelyn's computers cataloged potential victims like business prospects, income levels, family size, vulnerability ratings. Fraud wasn't just a crime to her, it was a business model. Ava's presentation sealed the case. Bank records showed Marcus had funneled over $70,000 in stolen sales, with online listings documenting systematic trafficking of vehicle parts. They hadn't only stolen cars and property, they'd stolen faith in local government and the sense of safety from every resident they targeted. Victim statements that followed were heartbreaking. Mrs. Preston described sleepless nights after receiving bogus violation letters, terrified of losing her home. An aging veteran stood with tears in his eyes as he recalled signing over his beloved motorcycle. "I served my country for 3 decades, and I trusted that an official seal meant something," he choked. These people destroyed that trust. They stole more than property, they stole years of my life. Others followed immigrants, single parents, hard-working families, each recounting fear, humiliation, and betrayal. The weight of voices pressed down on the courtroom until even the judge leaned forward, listening intently. This trial wasn't only about theft, it was about the theft of trust itself. The most damning evidence came from Marcus's own digital footprint. Text logs and social posts revealed him mocking his victims, bragging about easy money from clueless neighbors, and posting photos of stolen goods with captions like, "Community service pays when Mom makes the papers." The cruelty and arrogance were laid bare for everyone to see. What happened here wasn't desperation dressed as crime. It was calculated greed, predators targeting the vulnerable for easy profit. The prosecution showed how the defendants even tried to intimidate witnesses. They placed threatening calls to victims who had filed complaints, warning them to back off or face more legal trouble. The prosecutor stated plainly, this pattern of intimidation continued after their arrests, showing no remorse and ongoing criminal intent. Judge Whitaker didn't soften his words at sentencing. They abused public trust to commit organized fraud against those least able to fight back. This kind of exploitation undermines civic life itself and demands maximum punishment. Samantha was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with 5 years supervised release. Marcus received 8 years plus 3 years probation. The court emphasized that he hadn't been a passive accomplice. He created listings, arranged fraudulent sales, and pocketed tens of thousands. Both were ordered to repay over $200,000 to 43 victims across 3 states. The judge noted how they deliberately targeted people unlikely to question fake authority, making their actions especially cruel. Restitution covered everything: property losses, legal fees, emotional damages, and punitive costs. My truck repairs and lost wages were paid in full. Mrs. Harlan restored her vintage motorcycle and secured her home. Mr. Jensen replaced his stolen tools and was compensated for the months of stress. The conviction carried lasting consequences. Samantha and Marcus were banned from ever serving on HOAs, city councils, or nonprofits. Their records barred them from jobs requiring access to official documents. Every HOA decision Samantha had touched in the last 5 years was re-examined. HOS Insurance Company later settled a civil suit for $500,000. That money funded neighborhood-wide improvements, surveillance cameras, better lighting, and new oversight rules requiring background checks for board members. Months later, I received a letter from the FBI. My documentation, they wrote, had helped uncover a national fraud scheme tied to organized crime. The evidence from our case was being used to pursue RICO charges across 12 states. What began as a small neighborhood dispute had become a key part of dismantling a nationwide criminal operation. Our community didn't just recover, we grew stronger. We formed a permanent residents association, created education programs on fraud prevention, built emergency funds, and established communication systems to protect each other. Ironically, Marcus's court-ordered service meant working under my supervision to restore my truck. Watching him reinstall the exact parts he once stole was poetic justice. One day he admitted, "I thought we were clever for getting things without paying. But we weren't clever, we were just predators. The people we hurt didn't deserve it, whether genuine or not." The acknowledgement mattered, but the most powerful moment came when Samantha, in her prison uniform, was forced to read a public apology. In that courtroom, she admitted that every document had been fake, every claim of authority false, and every victim chosen for their vulnerability. The same woman who once waved fraudulent papers in my driveway now stood stripped of power, confessing to it all. Today, my truck sits restored where this nightmare began, only now it carries a reminder. Fraud can be fought, and communities can heal stronger than before. And if you want more real HOA stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to Listen HOA Stories, because the truth behind neighborhood power can be stranger than fiction.